Thanks Monica and Ralph for inviting me here to Cologne and for organizing this amazing event, online event. It's so exciting to take part in it. Although I am here in Cologne enjoying the sunshine and the technical support you are giving me. Thanks for that as well. Yes, so far we have seen how Corpora can be used in order to mainly solve lexical translation problems. My opinion is that they can also be used to solve grammatical translation problems. For example, when we have typological differences between the source and the target language, as well as typological gaps. But in order to do so, you need to put something into the corpus to get more out of it. So you have to enrich it, to annotate it. And I will talk about tools for the annotation of Corpora, and later on about online Corpora which are annotated and which might be useful for you. Okay, but let me give you an example why raw text Corpora are not sufficient for some questions, research questions as well as practical questions. When Melville Lohan and Mona Baker started off working with Corpora in order to find out whether translated text is more explicit than original text, they looked for the optional that in English. So their hypothesis was that the optional that in English translated text is more frequent than in non-translated English text. So the translator tends to make text more explicit than original authors do. What did they have to do? They looked for reporting verbs like say, tell, think, and filtered them manually according to the existence of the complementizer that or a zero connector. This is a lot of work when working with big Corpora, because you have to do it manually, and they found, yes, for the reporting verbs we looked at, translations are more explicit than original text, but it would be much more easier to do this research with an annotated corpus, where you don't have to look at the lexical level, but you can look for zero complementizers or the dead realization. So we started working with annotated Corpora. So the drawbacks are you have a lot of false negatives. You have, in this case, the focus on one language. You have the focus on the lexical layer only, and the focus on translation universals or properties instead of translation strategies, which we would like to have as well. So we started developing an annotated corpus, the CroCo Corpus for English-German, and I would like to introduce you to the corpus design and the annotation and alignment layers. We have English texts included in our corpus as well as German texts. German originals, GO, English originals, so we have a bilingual comparable corpus, originals in both languages. We have seen that so far. Then we have translations as well. So we also have a parallel corpus, a translation corpus. German originals and English translations, English originals and their German translations. But then we can also use a monolingual comparable corpus with translated text and non-translated texts in German and the same constellation in English. We did this for 8 registers. So in order to find out what the register criteria are, we compiled a reference corpus which is register neutral, but which is not important for us today. Okay, our registers are the following: essay, fiction, instructional text, popular scientific texts, shareholders' letters, speeches, political speeches, tourism brochures, and websites. These are our registers, and now let's have a look at the annotation and alignment layers. We annotated our corpus with meta information, including information on the translator, the gender of the translator, and so on. But then we included linguistic information into our corpus. So we tokenize the corpus. We analyze it for morphology, which is important for English-German, because in German you have one word, for example, Taxifahrer, which are two words in English, taxi driver. If you do contrastive investigations, well, you have to compare this phenomenon. And we can do this with a morphological analysis, which says, okay, the taxi driver, the Taxifahrer in German is pretty much the same, a compound compared to the English version. Then we have part of speech tagging, word class information, nouns, verbs in our corpus, and sense relations in order to find out cohesive relations. More importantly, on the chunk layer, on the phrase layer, we included phrase structure as well as grammatical functions like subject, object, adverbials, and stuff like this. So it's a very extensive grammatical annotation which we put into this corpus. Furthermore, we aligned the corpus on several layers. So we used the alignment on the sentence level, which you can also find in a lot of translation memories. But we also aligned for clauses, for phrases, and on the word level as well. So the corpus looked pretty much like this. Here you have the English translation on the left and the German original on the right-hand side. Here you have popular scientific texts, and this is the sentence. The sentence is here displayed as a tree, a syntactic tree, and you have information on prepositional objects here, subject, and so on, and the information on part of speech and semantic relations are hidden in this visualization, but they are there. And here you can also see the alignment layers on word level, on node level, on sentence level. Okay, what can we query with this corpus? We can query, of course, words like he, or under, or hands, but we can also query translation solutions or funny things like empty links, non-translations on the grammatical layer, as well as crossing lines. For example, the translated sentence, he whimpered softly under her hands, was the German original, ihre Hände ließen ihn leise wimmern. In English, her hands let him softly whimper. So what happened here? Ihre Hände, the German subject, moved to the end of the sentence under her hands in the adverbial. So we have a crossing line here. The words, the same words, are represented in the sentence, but not in the same grammatical function. Whereas ihn, the direct object, moved into the subject position. And this we can query with our corpus. We can ask for words which are aligned, for example, hands. So we can look for every word which is aligned to another word, which has a different grammatical function in the target text. And so we get these translation strategies displayed. And then we have non-alignments, which we can query as well. For example, lesen or this one under, and which might be interesting as well. So this is possible with our corpus. Now let's have a look at the research side. I will go into a more practical side later on. The research on translation properties, like Mona Baker did it, on explicitation, simplification, and so on, can be done with our corpus as well. But we looked not at verbs like tell, say, and so on. We looked for these shifts we can query in our corpus. So we found a lot of verb-noun shifts in our corpus, more in the English-German translation direction, the blue bar, than in the German-English translation direction, which is normalization for English-German, because German is more nominal than English is. And if you look at the concordances, at the examples which can be displayed, you find examples like the following: the English sentence, whether you want to communicate, learn, work or play, the PC can enrich and improve the experience. In German ganz gleich, ob Sie ein Hilfsmittel zur Kommunikation oder zum Lernen, Arbeiten oder Spielen benötigen, and so on. So a lot of nominalizations in this sentence and in the whole corpus. Because of time reasons, I'm not going into detail here. There are a lot of more examples on this phenomenon. For example, the first sentence, die in Kyoto eingegangenen Verpflichtungen zur Verminderung der Treibhausgase. This is a very clumsy nominal phrase, which is typical of the German language with pre-modification and post-modification. And the English translation is realized very verbal. Yeah? The commitments they made in Kyoto to reduce greenhouse gases. So it's more verbal and easier to process, which is typical, more typical of English. So we have normalization as well. Then we looked at non-finite structures in English versus finite structures in German. One concordance example would be the German passenger car market was the only major market to see a decline in deliveries to customers. Well, here to see is typical of English. English is very productive in using non-finite structures. What are you going to do with it in the translation? Well, if you need help with it, you can just ask for non-finite structures in our corpus and get a lot of examples displayed. For example, the one you can see here, der Pkw-Markt in Deutschland ist der einzige wesentliche Markt, in dem ein Rückgang, and so on. So this is a relative clause, of course, in German, which is finite, which might be trivial, but there are more complex examples in the corpus as well. Okay, I will skip this because of time reasons. Let's have a more practical look into the corpus. Again, we can ask for crossing lines and empty links. And I mentioned that there are a lot of grammatical problems because of typological differences between languages. So we know that German, for example, has a greater grammatical morphology than English. We use our case system, which allows us more freedom in our word order. So we can put objects wherever we want to, in the beginning of the sentence, at the end of the sentence. We are very free with this respect, which is not the case in English, of course, where we have a very fixed SVO word order. But then we have less semantic diversity of grammatical relations. In German, for example, we cannot use agentive subjects that productive than it can be done in English. I will have some examples later on. On a more structural level, we have more raising structures in English, structures like something, well, I have examples later on, more extraction, more cleft sentences, but less passive alternatives. And these structures can be problematic while translating a text from English into German or the other direction, because there are these typological differences and sometimes they are gaps and you don't know how to solve them in your translation. So let's have a look at some solutions. And for this search, I used a corpus, not our corpus, but an online available corpus, the Opus corpus. I will show you the website later on, which is annotated for part of speech as well. So it's open, available, annotated for part of speech, and you can ask, for example, for cleft sentences. And you get examples like you can see here, and it is these amendments which I move tonight, and so on. And I displayed the German and the French solutions. There are a lot of more, you will see them in a minute, where you can see how cleft sentences can be translated into German and into French and into many more languages. So in German, we don't use clefting, at least not so frequently like in English. And And here in these examples, you can see that they are simply left out. In the first example, these amendments, diese Änderungsanträge, are moved to the front of the sentence. So we have fronting in German, where the focus is preserved in the translation. But in the other examples, this focus gets lost. So the translator didn't know how to deal with this special focus and just didn't translate it. And that's perfectly okay. And it's good to see that this is perfectly okay to not translate this special focus. But there are examples, for example, you can see them here, where this focus is translated with a focus particle in German, doch. Here, this is a special focus particle, and it can be used as a translation strategy to translate cleft sentences in German. Here again, doch. Yeah? So this is like an interactive reference grammar where you can find out how to translate cleft sentences into German. Yeah? Then we have object-to-subject raising. Small arms and light weapons are easy to come. So this construction, easy to come, is very frequently used in English. German is not that productive with raising structures, and they are hard to translate. And in all these translations, the translator found a lexical solution, mostly an adverb, in order to translate it. Okay, and you have a lot of translations to look at and to see how translators dealt with this problem. Okay, and then we have passive alternatives in German, which are not easy to translate into English. For example, lässt sich. This is a typical passive alternative in German. And here you can see that we have straight passive in English, of course, sometimes with a modal realization. Here, in this case, can, because lässt triggers this modal realization. But in the next examples, you can see a very interesting strategy. The German sentence, in diesem Sinne lässt sich argumentieren, is translated with a personal pronoun and an active solution. We can say that. So here we find a very addressee-oriented realization in the translation, in the English solution, whereas the German is more content-oriented and more, well, unpersonal. And the other examples are the same. Lässt sich verhindern, dass die Globalisierung zu einem Boomerang wird? Can we prevent? Yeah? Again, unpersonal in German. Well, is it possible to prevent? Whereas we have a very active and addressee-oriented version in English. And this is the same. Es ist zu hoffen. It can be hoped, literally. But in the English version, I hope it will serve. Yeah? Again, very, very stylistically different from the original or from the German version. So here translation strategies can be found very, very easily. And the best thing to do is to have a look at all these corpora, because, well, you can use the CroCo Corpus. Please contact me if you would like to. But there are a lot of corpora which are annotated, and I have listed some of them. And I would like to show you more of the last two here, the Opus Corpus, which I've shown you before, and the Wortschatz Leipzig. How much time do I have? Okay, then I can go into some more examples. Again, the Opus Corpus, and this is the website you will see if you go to the URL. You have different registers. Again, the famous Europal corpus, consisting of European parliamentary debates, which is used for machine translation purposes a lot. But you also have a lot of instructional texts, but also medical texts, subtitles, and so on. So there are a lot of registers you can use. Many languages. There are more for the other corpora, in fact. And then, for example, you can, of course, use it for lexical purposes as well. You can type in word minister with a wildcard, and then you can do some terminological work for political translations, for example, and you have all the ministers which do exist in these texts: Innenminister, Verkehrsminister, Bildungsminister, and their translations into several languages. I have chosen French, Italian, and English here, and so you can very easily compile a word field and do your terminology work with this corpus. You have more ministers here, so you can just flip them through and build up your terminology on this basis. The same is possible with the Wortschatz of the University of Leipzig. The URL was in my list and will be in the presentation. Here you have many languages. You can see the selection here, and you can type in. My example was minister, and here the interesting thing is the texts are already processed statistically, and they display you the significant co-occurrences of the word minister, but also significant left neighbors, significant right neighbors. For English, for German, here you also have a very nice terminological field which you can use very easily: Außenminister, Innenminister, and so on. And here again for French, which has to be filtered, of course. You have to go through it and filter out all the proper names, for example. But it's a nice start to do terminological work on this basis. Getting back to the opus corpus I showed you in the very beginning, you can also ask, I mentioned it is tagged for part of speech, you can also ask for part of speech tags. And here an interesting thing are pronominal adverbs in German. Little words like thereof, which are rarely used in English, but which in German are very frequently used: dabei, dafür, davon, and which are not easy to translate. And you can just type in pos for part of speech is pro-af, which means pronominal adverb. There's a list of part of speech tags which explains what they mean, so you can just go to this list and see what you would like to query. And then you get like examples like these. A lot of pronominal German adverbs: dafür, darüber, darauf, daher. And you can see that the translation in most of the cases is lexicalized. For example, we have often discussed the meta. So here a lexical solution is found for this darüber. Here again, we will return to this topic. Again, a noun is found in order to translate this darauf in the German version. So again, translation students or translators get an option in order to get rid of this translation problem. And then you can filter results. You can look, for example, for the word result as a noun, and you get all examples of result where it is tagged as a noun, and you can have it result as a verb. This might result. And this is important for English, where a lot of verbs can be nouns, verbs, adverbials. Think of the verb round, which can be everything. And you can filter these words here and save a lot of manual filtering work. To sum up, the advantages of querying a tree bank or an annotated corpus, in my opinion, are that you have less false positives and more hits by directly addressing structural features, for example, the Cleft sentences or n-grams on a structural layer. We yield more accurate queries results so that quantitative measures can be applied on structural queries as well, grammatical queries. We can find typical collocations and co-occurrences on the lexical layer, but also on the grammatical layer. And we do not only find potential, but also probable translation solutions, because we have the frequencies as well. If there's a translation solution which occurs only once, it's probably not the best one compared to a solution which we can find several times in the corpus. So a quantitative tendency can be figured out as well. So thank you for your for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.